In exactly 14 minutes, a Federal Reserve chairman watched something that would fundamentally change how he viewed American institutions. But Jerome Powell didn't expect to witness the systematic dismantling of accountability in real time. What he saw in that confirmation hearing would make him question everything he thought he knew about the rule of law in America. Picture this moment with me. A Senate Judiciary Committee room, cameras rolling, the nation watching. Chuck Grassley sits as chairman, wielding procedural rules like weapons. Across from him, Sheldon Whitehouse prepares to expose something that goes far deeper than partisan politics. And in the witness chair sits Emile Bove, a nominee who would soon demonstrate how institutional stonewalling has become an art form. From my perspective as Fed chair, I've seen countless confirmation hearings and testified before Congress dozens of times. I understand the delicate dance between oversight and privilege, but what happened that day wasn't dancing, it was warfare. Whitehouse opened with surgical precision, challenging Grassley's attempt to shield the nominee behind attorney-client privilege and deliberative process claims. Congress has never accepted the constitutional validity of either such privilege, Whitehouse declared, his voice cutting through the formalities. He was right, of course. These privileges have never superseded congressional oversight, especially during nominations. But here's what struck me most. Whitehouse wasn't just making a procedural point. He was defending the constitutional framework that keeps democracy functional. When Congress can't examine how power has been used, oversight dies. When oversight dies, accountability follows. Then came the questions that would expose everything. Whitehouse asked Bove directly about his role in Ed Martin's scheme to create an unprecedented criminal investigation to justify seizing greenhouse gas reduction funds. Bove's response, "I'm not aware of such a plan, Senator, but I did participate in the matter that you're referring to." That contradiction should have ended the hearing immediately. You can't claim ignorance of a plan while simultaneously admitting participation in the very matter being questioned. But Bove had perfected the art of saying nothing while appearing cooperative. The real bombshell came next. Whitehouse revealed that Martin had gone to court alone, without a single career attorney willing to sign the pleading. Think about that. A politically appointed U.S. attorney so isolated from his own office that no career prosecutor would attach their name to his legal filing. That's not normal prosecutorial practice. That's prosecutorial misconduct. Will you agree that is very unusual for a politically appointed United States attorney to file a pleading without the support of a single career prosecutor? Whitehouse pressed. Bove's response was chilling in its emptiness. No, I don't agree with that. From where I sit, managing an institution built on credibility and public trust, this exchange revealed something terrifying. When political appointees can operate without institutional guardrails, when career professionals are sidelined or removed for refusing to participate in questionable schemes, the entire foundation of lawful governance crumbles. Whitehouse then exposed the criminal division chief who was pushed out after refusing to sign Martin's flawed pleading. Again, Bove retreated to his practiced evasion. I participated in the matter. No acknowledgement of whether the removal was justified, no explanation of the circumstances, just the same hollow phrase, repeated like a mantra. But the most damaging revelation was yet to come. After Martin's pleading was shot down by the magistrate judge, the case was apparently shopped to other districts, seeking a more favorable venue for the same questionable seizure attempt. Did you contact them? Whitehouse demanded. I refer you to my prior answer, Senator, Bove replied. This is where my economic training kicked in. I understand market behavior, institutional trust, and systemic risk. What I was witnessing wasn't just political theater, it was the methodical destruction of the very principles that make our legal and economic systems function. When the Department of Justice becomes a tool for political objectives rather than independent law enforcement, it creates uncertainty that ripples through every market, every institution, every citizen's sense of security. If career prosecutors can be removed for refusing questionable orders, if cases can be shopped between districts until political objectives are achieved, if nominees can stonewall Congress without consequence, then we're not operating under the rule of law anymore. We're operating under the rule of power. Whitehouse captured the moment perfectly when his time expired. I have an individual here who is here seeking confirmation to one of the highest judicial offices in the land. I'm asking quite legitimate questions about potential misconduct in office, and the fact that I can't get anything resembling a straight answer signals a really bad moment for this committee. As someone who has spent decades in public service, watching this exchange was like watching institutional credibility evaporate in real time. Each non-answer from Bove, each procedural shield raised by Grassley, each moment of strategic silence represented another crack in the foundation of accountable government. The greenhouse gas reduction funds that Bove helped target weren't just government money. They represented billions in economic activity, jobs, and environmental progress. When political appointees can weaponize criminal investigations to freeze these programs based on ideological opposition rather than legitimate legal concerns, they're not just abusing power, they're destabilizing the economic frameworks that businesses and investors depend on. But the broader implications terrify me more than any single case. If this becomes the new normal, if nominees can refuse to answer oversight questions, if career professionals can be purged for maintaining ethical standards, then we're witnessing the transformation of American institutions into tools of political warfare. From my position overseeing monetary policy and financial stability, I see how quickly confidence can evaporate. Markets function on predictability, transparency, and institutional integrity. When those foundations crack, the economic consequences can be catastrophic. What Whitehouse exposed that day wasn't just one bad nominee or one questionable case. It was a system increasingly designed to avoid accountability rather than ensure it. A Department of Justice more concerned with protecting political appointees than pursuing justice. A confirmation process more focused on shielding nominees than examining their fitness for office. And all of this happened on camera in front of the American people, with no consequences for the stonewalling, the evasions, or the institutional damage. That's what keeps me awake at night. Not individual cases or political disputes, but the systematic erosion of mechanisms that make democratic governance possible. When Congress can't oversee, when nominees won't answer, when career professionals are silenced, we're not seeing political dysfunction. We're seeing the early stages of institutional collapse. The questions Whitehouse asked weren't partisan attacks. They were the kinds of questions that any functioning democracy requires its representatives to ask and its nominees to answer. The fact that those questions went unanswered should concern every American, regardless of political affiliation, because when accountability dies, democracy follows, and when democracy fails, everything else we've built starts crumbling too. This wasn't just a bad confirmation hearing, it was a preview of what American institutions become when power matters more than principles, when loyalty trumps integrity, and when silence becomes a strategy rather than an exception. 3 days after that hearing, I found myself in my office at the Federal Reserve, staring at briefing documents about systemic financial risks. But my mind kept drifting back to that moment when Bove simply refused to answer, not couldn't answer, wouldn't answer. I've dealt with congressional testimony for decades. I know the difference between protecting legitimate institutional interests and outright stonewalling. What Bove demonstrated wasn't constitutional privilege, it was constitutional contempt. The more I thought about it, the more troubling patterns emerged. Remember, this wasn't just about greenhouse gas funds. This was about the methodology. Create questionable criminal predicates to achieve political objectives. Remove career professionals who resist. Shop cases between jurisdictions until you find compliance. Then, when questioned about it, hide behind manufactured privileges that don't actually exist. I started making calls to former colleagues, people who've worked at justice, people who understand how these institutions are supposed to function. What I learned chilled me to the bone. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a playbook. One former career prosecutor told me, Jerome, they're not just weaponizing investigations. They're weaponizing prosecutorial discretion. When politics drives charging decisions rather than facts, the whole system becomes illegitimate. Think about what that means for market confidence. When businesses can't predict whether they'll face criminal investigation based on legal standards or political calculations, investment decisions become impossible. When environmental programs can be frozen through manufactured criminal cases rather than legitimate regulatory processes, long-term planning becomes meaningless. But here's what really keeps me awake. The silence of institutions that should have pushed back. Where was the Bar Association when career prosecutors were being purged? Where were judicial conferences when cases were shopped between districts? I realized I was witnessing institutional capture, not through dramatic confrontations, but through gradual erosion. One compromise confirmation at a time, one unanswered question at a time. The Fed operates on credibility. When I speak about interest rates, markets move because they trust our decisions are based on economic analysis, not politics. But what happens when that principle evaporates from justice? When prosecutors are chosen for loyalty rather than competence, the economic implications are staggering. When businesses can't predict whether they'll face legitimate enforcement or weaponized investigations, they postpone investments and delay hiring. That's not just bad economics, that's national suicide. 2 weeks after the hearing, a career attorney at Justice reached out through back channels. She couldn't speak on the record, but painted a picture matching everything Whitehouse had exposed. They're not just removing people who won't sign questionable pleadings, she told me. They're removing people who ask too many questions. They're creating an environment where career attorneys are afraid to provide honest legal advice. That crystallized it for me. This wasn't about one bad nominee. This was about transforming federal law enforcement from legal standards to political calculations. And if that transformation succeeds, if accountability continues to die while cameras roll and senators watch, then everything we've built becomes vulnerable. Not just justice or democracy, but the entire economic framework that depends on honest institutions. The real tragedy isn't what happened to the greenhouse gas funds or the career prosecutors who were pushed out. The real tragedy is what happens next. When stonewalling works, it spreads. When nominees can refuse to answer oversight questions without consequence, the precedent is set. When institutions fail to defend themselves, they invite further attack. That's what I saw that day. That's what keeps me awake at night. And that's why everyone should care about what happened in that hearing room. Because when accountability dies, everything else starts dying too. And once that process begins, stopping it becomes exponentially harder than preventing it would have been. That's the real story of what happened in that room. That's what Jerome Powell saw. And that's why it matters for all of us. Of